Hello, Rob Venn here. Today we're going to be looking at the representation of people in regional magazines. So, what are we looking at here? Well, we're looking at this idea of representation. Remember that when we're looking at any media text, we're not seeing the real world. We're seeing somebody's filtered opinion of the real world. We're seeing carefully constructed images that have been designed to connote particular meanings. This process is called mediation. We are representing the world through this filter of the media to an audience. Nothing in the design of these magazines is left to chance. Everything has been carefully constructed to create particular meaning. So, what are the things we need to be considering when it comes to regional magazines and representation? Well, being a regional magazine, one of the first things we need to consider is the regional identity. We are going to be doing a magazine for South Yorkshire, so what is the image of South Yorkshire you're trying to convey? We also need to look at the idea of subcultures. If you're going to do a regional listings magazine, it's largely going to be aimed at the kind of young hipster crowd that you'll find in the city centres of somewhere like Sheffield or Leeds. Students, arty types, people who are interested in art, theatre, cinema, music, dining, that kind of stuff. Consider your age. We're looking at youth culture here. These are magazines principally aimed at people who are young, who have disposable income. They're not cluttered down with kids and mortgages and all this kind of stuff. Gender. Remember, when we talk about this kind of crowd, we're not talking about mere binary opposites of male and female. Gender being a very fluid concept. So you could be thinking about playing with that kind of gender identity in the magazine if you want to. Again, race is something to consider. Don't forget about thinking about the representations of non-white members of your audience, although obviously white members of your audience are going to be your primary audience. And of course sexuality, again, which ties in with your gender, gay, straight, LGBT identities. Again, fluid things that you can play around with if you want to in your magazine. Now, one of the key things we need to be considering is this idea of the stereotype. This concept originally came from printing, but the idea of the way we use stereotyping in today's kind of meaning comes from the American journalist Walter Lippmann back from 1922. And with stereotype, we mean a preconceived or oversimplified idea of the characteristics which typify a person, situation, group of people, place, whatever. And it's the attitudes that are based on this preconception. But also a person who appears to conform closely to the idea of a type. Stereotypes are going to be something that you're going to be using a lot in your magazine. You're going to have a stereotypical audience member that you're going to be aiming your product at. So consider carefully what stereotypes you're using in your magazine, why you're using in the magazine, and how you constructed that stereotype. I am expecting you to be mentioning Walter Lippmann in your evaluation, in your analysis, your textual analysis of media texts. A similar concept is the idea of the in and the out group. This comes from Richard Dyer's seminal work on representations from 1977. In groups and out groups are stereotypes, but in groups are people who are like us. They belong. They are what we consider normal. They're like us. Out groups are anyone who don't conform to that. As a result, out groups are often demonized. They become folk devils, figures of fear. Which ties into the idea of subcultures. We think of the normal, everyday, mainstream culture of a place as its parent culture. It doesn't literally have to be the culture of your parents. It just means the mainstream. It means the norm. A subgroup is a group within a society or within a group of people. They tend to be characterized by a shared belief or interest that's at variance to those of the larger group. They are an out group in compared to the parent culture's in group. They will have distinctive ideas, practices, or way of life. They could be based on all sorts of things. It could be interest in a particular sport. It could be their religion. It could be their, particularly with youth cultures, would be their interest in music. Music subcultures are going to be one of the key things you're going to consider revolving your magazine around, but also just the subculture of, your young hipster modern crowd from a large city who are likely to be students. Hipsters. These are the key people you should be aiming your magazine at. All these regional listing magazines are kind of aimed at these people. Now, interesting when it comes to music. Channel 4 recently, a few years ago, did a thing called the UK Tribes survey. And they identified all sorts of youth cultures, youth subcultures based around all sorts of different things. But one of the key things that youth subcultures have always revolved around are music. And they separated them into these 5 basic music categories. You may fit into one of these. Interesting to consider which one. We've got your young alts, alternatives. These include your rockers, your metalheads, your emo or scene kids, goths, hardcore, skaters. There are loads and loads of other ones. Those are just some of the key ones they identified. They're your rebel types, your outsiders, the people who like to think of themselves as out groups, your rebels. You've got your mainstream culture, chavs or chavas as they're sometimes called. They are mainly going to be interested in your top 40 mainstream dance music. Your fangirls, your blingers who are particularly into pop. You might consider the, your wee heart pop kind of crowd for that. Your tweenies. Then you've got your leading edge groups. These are your indie scenesters, the hipsters. They are going to be into things like electronic, pop music, indie music, the avant-garde. That means the forward or the cutting edge, the most out there kind of music. You've got your urban, that's your stylers. They're into things like R&B and hip-hop. And then you get your aspirants, the new casuals. They tend to be into underground club music. But those are the kind of audiences you might identify as readers of your magazine. I like these. This is from a website called Your Scene Sucks, where they do these kind of stereotypes of different kind of music subcultures. As you can see, they're all American ones, but a lot of these will tie in with the UK as well, although we do have our own. It'd be great if you could do something like this for your blog. It doesn't have to be drawn. It could be, a photograph you've taken off the internet or one you've taken yourself, and just annotate them like these. These are quite funny, but also very appropriate. Another theory I'm expecting you to be using in your analysis is Sarah Thornton's theory of subcultural capital. Capital is something that has exchange value. It is something that is valuable in some way. And she said that subcultural capital is the knowledge and commodities, stuff in other words, acquired by members of a subculture to make them cool. It's basically the currency of cool. People read music magazines in order to find out what is cool. It's, what clothes are in fashion, what bands are on tour, what albums are out, whatever. In a regional listings magazine, look at this picture here. We've got jewellery, food, artisanal coffee, humidors, cool stuff, the stuff that you buy to make you cool. Don't forget, magazines, listings magazines, and indeed music magazines like you did in AS are essentially just instruction manuals on how to be cool. Part of this is about creating what Carl Rogers called an ideal self. He was a psychologist writing back in 1961, and he says that inside everybody's head we've got an ideal self. Now, where do these ideal selves come from? Well, they're shaped by media representations, in as much as anything, by role models, and it's about being your perfect self. Now, he never said anything about this, but we can extrapolate that if there's such a thing as an ideal self, there can easily be such a thing as an ideal partner as well. Look at this as an advert from a regional magazine about getting rid of stubborn fat for summer. This is about creating your ideal self, and you have these images of people who are meant to represent your ideal self. Definite theory I'm expecting to be mentioned, very important one, crops up a lot in media. Again, as I said, you can have an ideal partner as well as an ideal self. This is an advert for a men's barbers, so why has it got a picture of a woman on it? You're going to need a bigger black book. In other words, you're going to look so good, you're going to be getting tons of girls' numbers. It's about making you attractive to the opposite sex. So she's there as an ideal partner for the perceived straight male audience. That's what it's about. They're objects of sexual or romantic desire, basically, an ideal partner. Interesting representations of age. Again, youth, exuberant, excited, playful. The birds in this case represent the spirit of youth. The pigeons. Picture of Wolf Alice here. You got beautiful painting artwork on this, because you know then. Again, old age. There's something very Yorkshire about this picture. The greyness of it, the kind of 70s feel to it. The boot shopping bag. It's, maybe the pigeons represent a youthful spirit. I don't know, but two very different representations of age there. This was highly unusual, of course. You very rarely see something like that in a magazine. Part of this, of course, is the idea of objectification. So when we're particularly looking at the representation of gender, objectification is a kind of feminist theory in which it says that objectification is a notion central to feminist theory. It can be roughly defined as the seeing and or treating of a person, usually a woman, as an object, specifically a sex object, so that women are often divided into body parts to be gazed at by a perceived male heterosexual audience as sex objects, not as people. This ties in with the idea of voyeurism, also scopophilia, scope from to look, philia meaning to love, the love of looking. Voyeurism is, or a voyeur is a person who gains sexual pleasure from watching others when they're naked or engaged in sexual activity, or generally just spying on people. This is the basis of all media, particularly media in which there is some kind of objectification going on. This ties in with a very famous theory, which I expect you to be using, which is Laura Mulvey's The Male Gaze, in which the female body is objectified in order to provide erotic pleasure for the perceived male heterosexual audience. Definitely want to be using that theory in your analysis. It's very important. So when we look at a magazine like this, the models in this hairdressing advert and on this front cover are there as both ideal selves for the female reader and ideal partners for the male reader. It can fulfill both role models, but they're certainly there as objectified people. It is again focusing on their naked or semi-naked bodies. They are both young, they are both attractive, they are there to be lusted after, either as an ideal self or an ideal partner. It's not saying anything about their achievements or their greatness. They're there simply because of their looks. Can this work the other way around? We've got this male equivalent of the male gaze. Now, feminists would say there is no female gaze because it's all about power, and because we live in a patriarchal society where women are seen as, lesser to men in many respects, although feminism has changed that. A man cannot be objectified in the same way as a woman can, but it doesn't alter the fact that this guy is on there purely because he looks good. Yeah, but notice, glad tidings of gay joy this Christmas. It's a clubbing magazine. This is also a male gaze, but it's a gay male gaze. This is there as an object of desire, an ideal self or an ideal partner for a gay audience. That's not to say, however, that a female viewer might not find it equally attractive. Again, Lady Gaga here being portrayed in a remarkably unsexy manner, to be frank. She's still semi-naked, obviously. She's still an attractive woman, but this mask is kind of hiding her face to a certain degree. She's being less sexualized than they are, obviously. Don't forget representations of race. It's a sad fact that non-white models are rarely seen on the front covers of magazines. Starting to change a bit nowadays, but it's still, they're not as visible as Caucasian models. But again, really nice photography on this. Beautiful black and white photography, to be fair on that. Very good photograph. Notice the lack of a direct gaze in both of these, suggesting an aloofness with a shyness perhaps. Again, great photograph. Very stylish. So, these are the key terms I expect you to be using in your evaluation. I want to see all of them being mentioned somewhere. Walter Lippmann, 1922, concept of stereotypes. Richard Dyer, 1977, InOut Groups. Sarah Thornton, 1995, Subculture of Capital. Laura Mulvey, 1975, The Male Gaze. I expect to see all of those in your evaluation when you're analysing your magazines. So I don't just want you talking about, oh, this is a masthead, these are cover lines, that's an impressum. I want you to be talking about what photography is used, why it looks like the way it does, and how are people being represented. Okay, if you need any help, feel free to contact me or whoever teaches you, and talk to you next time.